Let's get started. This is our law firm. We're Pierre O'Connor and Strauss. We're a New York-based law firm, offices here in Albany, New York, and in New York City. We are primarily estate planning elder law attorneys, and this is our crew. A lot of them are here today. Raise your hands, everybody, if you're here from Pierre O'Connor and Strauss. So make sure you say hello throughout the day. This is our agenda. It's an aggressive agenda. We're going to try to keep it tight on time. So with that, I'm going to move right along, but we'll get to the legislative session in just one moment. I want to thank the sponsors. This is a big day. There are a lot of costs, and we have a lot of people helping us to put this program together. And give our sponsors a round of applause to start the morning off. These are the folks that make it possible for you to be here and for us not to charge you. So thanks to all of our sponsors. We are excited that they are with us today. And what we're going to talk about today, obviously, is aging issues. And these are some statistics from the Fiscal Policy Institute, a report that came out in March of this year. And if you look at this number, 4.6 million New Yorkers over age 65 by 2035. That's an increase of 29% from present day. And nearly 1 million New Yorkers will require home care by 2035. Worker shortage projected, if it doesn't change, to be 1.47 million workers needed in 2035. Where will they come from? And home care workers make less money, we all kind of know that, than other workers, including workers that flip hamburgers at McDonald's and Burger King. So how do we bring wage parity in to bring people into the workforce to satisfy the needs that our seniors have? National trends, we see a movement towards value-based payments in theory, but not yet in practice. But there are a lot of models that are being formulated, and this means that they're looking at the whole person and trying to create wellness as opposed to treat sickness. So we're excited about this. We're going to hear from some of the people in the Medicare world, Medicare Advantage world, that are working very hard on that concept. And if we could keep the noise down, please, if you could keep the conversations down, if you want to talk, please, out in the foyer. Thank you very much. Medicare and Medicare Advantage expansion, new waivers. We're going to hear about some of that from New York, and the adoption of new technologies. And some of our panels, we're going to talk about the technology that's advancing throughout the healthcare system, the home care system, and some exciting things that we think have part of the future in mind. So Governor Hochul has a master plan on aging. We're going to hear all about that today. Senator Gillibrand has a master plan on aging. President Biden has executive orders for home care. But when it comes to the bottom line, when our clients need care in the home, show me the money. How do you pay for that home health aid? Is Medicaid the answer? Do you private pay? Do you have long-term care insurance? How do you get the care you need and pay for it? So I want to turn it over now to Dan Bazile, who's going to host our panel with Senator Jacob Ashby and Assembly members John McDonald and Ron Kim. Dan.
All right, Lou, thank you very much. Thank you. This is my fourth year hosting this, and I appreciate them asking me back every time because they obviously think I'm doing a pretty decent job. So thank you guys for allowing me to do this. I do enjoy doing it, and the enjoyment really is asking these guys questions and trying to hold their feet to the fire as to what's going on with the state and as it relates to healthcare and elder care and continuing care. And so with that, good morning. I'm Dan Bazile. I'm from Spectrum News 1. I host a morning program there with Julie Chapman and Heather Morrison. So if you check that out every morning, that's where I'll be weekdays. In any case, I want to introduce you to the panel. This discussion this morning is going to be interesting, so we'll see. Without any particular order, Senator Jacob Ashby and Assemblymember John McDonald and Assemblymember Ron Kim. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I know you too well. Thank you guys so much for being here. We appreciate it. We're going to get right to it because we don't have much time. We have a lot of questions, and I'm sure the audience has questions as well. And also, I'm going to be walking around, guys, but there's also a microphone that will be available for anyone who wants to ask questions. Maybe in between, we'll see how it goes and how fast and how smooth this goes, depending on that. But we want some questions from you guys as well, and some folks from home if we have enough time. So I do have a lot of questions, guys. So we're going to begin right now. The home care worker shortage, that's a crisis. It's reached crisis level in the state of New York, okay? Last year, the legislature enacted an increase to $3 an hour above the minimum wage, rolled out over 2 years. Now, acknowledging that this was less than 150% of minimum wage needed, the governor promised last year that $3 an hour was just a start. But this year, that was cut back to $2 an hour. More than half of home care workers who don't have health insurance rather, through their jobs will see no increase because there's a deal struck to boost wages only to those with health insurance. First question, and this is to all of you guys. Anybody who wants to answer first, go ahead. How will the final state budget this year impact New York State seniors? The same goes with people with disability.
So it is early in the morning to get into the financial exercise of explaining the hourly wage. I'll be very blunt with you. And you're right, we delayed the October increase and it's going to start in January of next year. I had Ways and Means send me a matrix and I started to get dizzy looking at it. This year is a little bit complicated, right? Because we had this other discussion going on, separate and apart, but actually tied to when dealing with minimum wage in general. And as you know, the governor proposed a minimum wage increase, and that is going to be indexed for inflation going forward. One of the discussions in our conference that was very consistent is that we can't forget home care folks. Now, some people may think based on the outcome, we forgot them. I apologize up front, but the reality is we want to make sure that home care stays a certain margin ahead. I think the number is $3 per hour ahead. It's going to take some time to get there. It doesn't get there immediately. Like I said, there is a delay. We start to catch up, but I think it's $1.55 an hour on January 1st. And then over time, over a couple of years, actually probably 4 or 5 years, eventually it gets to that point. So same token, I think it's important that we not lose sight of the fact that we increase rates for Medicaid reimbursement. I know that's a question coming up in hospitals and nursing homes because there's healthcare shortages there. And we also increased, not to a level that we're happy with, but a 4% increase in our other O agencies, developmentally disabled and mental health. Trying to move everybody forward, but as you might guess, it gets a little bit challenging.
Senator Ashby, you have a...
I agree with what John said. We have to be doing more. I'm an occupational therapist by trade, and I spent a lot of time working in different institutional settings, but also had my own practice that was community-based. So I treated people in their homes, focused on aging in place and home modifications, and how many people could afford to do something like that. It was a very limited population. And when we looked at the ability of third-party payers and Medicare and Medicaid being able to help out with that, it was even more limited. So obviously we need to be doing more with that. One of the things that I think that is far overdue, and I've talked with my colleagues about this on both sides of the aisle, and I think there's a growing push for it, is to rebase Medicaid, not only for long-term care, but across the board. We haven't seen a recalculation of Medicaid in over 15 years. Other states have it built in statutorily to occur every 3 to 5 years. And I think it's time that New York does that. And that will, in a sense, lift the floor for workers across the board, whether it's home care, whether it's other settings for long-term care, and I think give people a lot more options.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we need to first accept the fact that our home care system is broken. And the reason why it's broken is because the way it started as a Medicaid waiver program. And the moment that home care became accessible, we completely contracted out and outsourced everything from intermediaries, MLTCs to providers. We don't actually do anything in-house anymore in terms of delivering care directly to the people that needs it. Other states have gone out of their way to California to create a long-term care public benefit corporation to finance and pay for home care. Other states like Connecticut, they got rid of MLTCs entirely and make sure that we had a fee-for-service model for these services. And I'm not saying, those models are better but we need to take a look at the foundation of the system, because right now, the capitation-based system of Medicaid, we have no idea how much money the intermediaries are charging and what the calculus is, what the algorithm is into getting into charging for home care. And we have no idea what the billions of dollars through these intermediary insurance companies are going, because we lack the transparency and accountability of these dollars when it leaves the public sector.
So you all agree that there's a problem, home health care and home health workers, right? What policies are you guys working on, though, to try and fix that and help seniors and people with disabilities? I mean, are you working on any policies with anyone in the legislature or yourselves?
I am. I sponsor the legislation that I just talked about. I know Kerry Warner sponsors similar legislation in the Assembly. And we see on a regular basis when we meet as an aging committee, different pieces of legislation and different policies that are coming across to address this. But I also think that it's not going to be fixed with one piece of legislation. And I think that the issues that we see here are systemic across the board when we talk about the economy within New York State and safety. I think those two things bleed into each other in terms of how they're affecting these industries. New York needs to be a place where people not only want to come, but to stay. And right now we're seeing an outward migration of people, and we need to change that economically. We need to change that and make it a more affordable place for people who want to come here and stay here. And, I think we are taking the right steps to do that, but at times I feel like it's an imbalanced approach. And our aging population, unfortunately, is removed from the set of priorities during budget discussions. I feel like at times that occurs, and it's hard certainly being in the minority to push for that. But I do have colleagues like John and Ron who do an incredible job of trying to keep them at that level of priority and trying to make the points where, to address your question, Dan, to address these policies head on.
I would just add we had a couple of good wins in the budget. We're joined today by Greg Olson, the director of SOFA, State Office for Aging. And one of the areas that we try to tackle is the above poverty, non-Medicaid home care space. Because this is a population, the middle market, where if we don't serve them, if we don't get rid of the waiting list for people waiting for the services, they would impoverish themselves and spend down to get to Medicaid. We're talking about 2,000 to 3,000 older adults every year spending down to Medicaid, costing the state up to hundreds of millions of dollars in Medicaid if we just invest a little bit more. So this year we added a record number of, thank you. With thanks to Greg and everyone else, we added $9.3 million, adding up to a total of $15 million in 2 years to start getting rid of that waiting list, which will be a big difference. Secondly, we're working on legislation right now to make the right to age a statutory right for the state of New York. The only right that we have in the books is common schools and public schools, a student's right to a sound basic education in the state constitution. If we can add an amendment to the state constitution that as an older adult, you have a right to quality aging in the state of New York with dignity, that would be a foundation of investments that we can really put in moving forward for the state of New York.
Just so you know, Ron's got his daughters up here leading the cheering, so just follow along, you'll be fine. I wish I could bring my kids to these events, jeez. So I wish I could get my kids to pay attention to me. Anyways, a couple different things. I'm going to kind of go in a circle though, because Jake and Ron bring up some very good points, and being the aging chairs of the respective committees, it makes perfect sense. It's interesting. I met with some Albany and Troy teachers yesterday, and they're telling me how they're down 60 teachers in Albany School District and 30 in Troy. And then I hear from police chiefs, they can't get people to be police officers, can't get firefighter. Where the hell did everybody go? Right? No, everywhere I turn around, the hospitals, nursing homes, where they all go and what's happening. So that's one problem. We have to find out where everybody went. We have to be also welcoming to new ideas to encourage people to be part of the workforce. We have a unique opportunity, as much as it get caught up in the political conversations, that there are many people that are coming to the state. There's going to be a lot of people as of today coming to New York. There's a lot of people coming here to get away from dreadful situations, and we need to have an open mind and an open heart to accept people, to help get them working papers, to help get them to be taxpayers, to help to be part of the workforce, because that's where it's coming from. I don't own my pharmacy anymore, but I'm there every day. I go into a lot of homes. I do a lot of vaccines for the disabled, for the undocumented. There's a lot of people out there that want to provide service. We just need to give them the opportunity, and we need to have an open mind to it. And the other thing we need to do, and this is more of a global issue, and hopefully I won't get in too much trouble when I say this, in our healthcare system, of which aging is central and part of it, we do nothing to encourage healthcare professionals to work together. The professions, thank you. We have a construct in the state of New York unique to any other state in the country, where the education department, great people, they work hard, they're very responsive to my concerns, but their focus primarily, and they do a good job of it, is to verify and certify people to be licensed for what they do. And that's great. But they readily admit that they have nothing to do with how the healthcare practices and professions work. And we have basically unintentionally, because of our Constitution, set up these barriers, and it gets very difficult for professionals to work together. We should be working in a collaborative practice environment. And we're actually working in a siloed practice environment.
Guys, maybe I didn't hear it, maybe you answered it, maybe you didn't. I didn't hear it, but I hate to go back to this. The healthcare shortage. People are making a minimum wage or a little minimum wage. That's just not enough money. And as Lou said previously, show me the money, right? I mean, he didn't do the dance. I probably could do the dance for you. Show me the money. Where is this money? You know, how are you going to solve this issue with healthcare workers not making enough and going to work at places like, you know, McDonald's, nothing against McDonald's, but working at other places other than, you know, trying to find a healthcare facility where they can do their work. I mean, they're not going to do it for this kind of money. Where are you going to get this money? How are you going to solve this? I'm just saying, where is this going to come from?
Does anyone get into healthcare to get rich? Anybody? I mean, I don't think, and I think people get into healthcare. I know I did, because they have a philanthropic heart and they have a desire to serve, and they want to help people. I'll address the question here.
Okay.
And I think there are ways that we can certainly increase the amount of money that people are making, because right now it's unsustainable and it's unaffordable. But I think that most people go into these professions, whether they're therapists, whether they're nurses, whether they're home care workers, and we see it now for the people that are still in there. That's how dedicated they are, is that they're willing to live in a level of poverty and continue to serve and help people and sustain that. But to your question, Dan, what are we doing with this? What am I doing with this? So the rebasing of Medicaid, I do sponsor legislation that would do that. And I know that in the Assembly, Kerry Warner sponsors legislation to do that. I also think that we are seeing an exodus in certain parts of healthcare of people who are veterans in that system, who've been there for a number of years, and through the pandemic, they've left for a variety of reasons. There's a loss of there's an institutional knowledge loss there. There's a knowledge gap. And so when people come in there, it's very hard for them, it's harder for them to lean on those subject matter experts and find them and develop those relationships. So I'm sponsoring legislation that would provide a stipend for nurse preceptors, for healthcare supervisors when they take on new students, right? So there is a financial incentive there. And that's not only for those preceptors there, that's also for the nurses and healthcare practitioners coming in so that they see that, so that they are continued to be valid. And like I said, there's not one piece of legislation that's going to totally fix this. It's a broader scope of legislation that I know I'm trying to address and my colleagues here are trying to address it. Does that answer the question, Dan?
A little bit, but with all due respect. All due respect, guys, okay? No one's trying to get rich, but they're trying to make a living. I mean,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
kicking in $900 a pound. You can't live on $17 an hour, $20 an hour. They're not trying to make $1 million an hour. They're just trying to make a living. So, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
I was an occupational therapist for 20 years. My mother was an LPN for a very long time. Started out when she was in high school doing that through the BOCES program. It's disgusting where it's at right now. And I know that the improvements that we're aiming at right now aren't a fix-all for it. There are ways that I think are going to continue to try and push for it. And we need your help.
Yeah, I wake up and go to bed thinking about this every single day because perhaps it impacts my constituents the worst in terms of how the system has negatively impacted their quality of life. Last year, the biggest healthcare union, 1199, privately arbitrated and settled massive wage theft in this industry for the last 10 years, where we know that $6 billion, up to $6 billion were stolen because they can't pay for overtime, but they settled at $30 million. That they got the verdict correct, but the remedy was woefully low, obviously, for the workers. And I bring this up because we have literally underwritten this industry of the wage theft of immigrant, women of color workers. And unless we get it right now in this moment, we're going to continue to exploit these workers moving forward. So that's why this is, in terms of how to finance this, we have three things. Either we tax the super wealthy class to pay for it, or two, we do something what Washington State is experimenting with, which is a regional tax system, payroll tax, nominal $1 or $2, to allow counties to determine whether they want to do long-term care or not. And thirdly, something that I'm working on, which is a long-term care authority, to start treating the care sector like Port Authority, Power Authority, the MTA, and start figuring out how to do public financing for this sector that we can pay for home care and long-term facilities for the state of New York.
So I want to go ahead. So first of all, it's funny, just so you know, up here, all we see is these two white lights at us. So Dan, you got to move over there because I can't answer your questions because I see these white lights, feel like it's Hogan's Heroes and everyone's just being interrogated. Thank you. It's much better.
Is that better?
That's much better. It's always good to answer somebody when you can see them, right?
Yes.
Oh, I see these white lights. So, a couple things. Once again, we discussed in the beginning, the fact that we are trying to keep the wages for home care about $3 an hour higher than the minimum wage. Now, my friend Ron will argue, as he did in conference, that the minimum wage is not sufficient. We should have raised it higher. And I get that. I don't disagree with it. It's about where we're going to make sure we have the revenue. And there are many individuals that came up with suggestions. The other thing, though, that we pushed for in the budget and we got in the budget, which I think is going to be helpful down the road. Those in home care, remember back in October when that first increase went up, everyone was expecting $2 an hour. And in some, not all, but probably more than mentioned, it was 20 cents an hour. There's a lack of transparency on what was going on with the MLTC plans. And in this budget, we demanded greater transparency and reporting to the department to make sure that this is not being looked at as a profit opportunity for the MLTC plans. Because that was a big issue that we had a hard time really understanding. And quite frankly, if you don't have the data, you can't make a decision.
All right, we're gonna delve into the budget a little bit since we're talking about the budget and how much was given out to certain parts of the healthcare industry. Why, during the budget process, did you guys continue to pump billions of dollars into Medicaid for health and long-term care, yet not invest any funds into the community-based infrastructure that can keep people out of more less expensive or more expensive healthcare and long-term care settings? I mean, why pump more money into that part and not this part?
I think it's emblematic of how the whole healthcare ecosystem is fracturing in every single aspect. We meet with the hospitals and we meet with the nursing home operators. They're having a terrible time. Think about the whole ecosystem. Wings are closed in nursing homes. I live in Cohoes. Probably, I would say one of the best long-term care environments in the state is at the Eddy Village Green in Cohoes. It's where my mom is now. 2 houses have been shut down for 3 years because they can't find the staff. Meanwhile, people are sitting in hospitals. Hospitals are not getting paid for individuals who should be in nursing homes, and they have wings shut down. Meanwhile, spent last week 8 hours in the emergency room with a family member. There's people that have been in the emergency room for days, and then take it a step further back. Ambulances are waiting on the ramps to discharge patients for 2 or 3 hours. And then go back to my hometown, Cohoes, where people are waiting for an ambulance from Guilderland to show up in Cohoes because they need some. The whole system is fracturing. EMS is struggling, hospitals, nursing homes. I agree with the question because the reality is, and this is why, and Lou, you started off with this, value-based payments. Try to provide some kind of sustainable monthly payment to providers to build up the infrastructure. Because otherwise, when we raise things by 7.5% for hospitals, 6.5%, maybe 7.5% for nursing homes and adult living centers, we're basically paying more for the widgets. But are we paying better for better outcomes? It's a challenge. And that same token, the hospitals and nursing homes have very large, powerful unions behind them that have spoke very loudly. Those voices are at the table, and other voices are too. But that played part of the process, and that's being truthful.
Yeah, just piggybacking off what John just said, we need better executive leadership moving forward and prioritizing what's important to our constituents, to our most vulnerable members. The hospital lobbying is one of the most powerful lobbying groups in the state of New York. Legislature has prioritized home care, the workers on the ground, the executive office to the last minute prioritized the industry stability in terms of hospitals. So we didn't have a seat at the table. So by design, the budget works in a way where the executive sets the agenda. We're playing defense the whole time. And then if it's late, the ball is in her court where she gets to dictate the agenda out of the budget. So unless we restructure and redesign the way we do our budget, if we have an executive that will always prioritize the industry, lobbyists versus the people who are actually doing the service for our most vulnerable, we're not going to get this right.
In the same vein, the state budget, it included a lot of increases for hospitals, nursing homes, assisted living. You guys talked about that. Okay. But no parallel funding for home health agencies. Not even close, right? Or hospices. Why not? Why the imbalance? Why do you just, and I know you talked about very powerful lobby, but that's also a very needed part of society that needs a little TLC. Why the imbalance?
Here's part of the mystery that I've always had, particularly when you look at the MLTC plans. No one sees it. We know it's happening. It's in the individual's homes, but it's not seen. You know, when you're in a hospital or nursing home and you know that wings are shut down, you see that. That's a terrible answer, by the way. I'm just being very blunt. And I have the same issue as a provider. I'll say a lot of the patients who are getting services, they have no clue what they're entitled to. And when you call the Department of Health, they say, well, they have to make a complaint. Well, if you don't know what you're entitled to, what are you going to complain about? So, listen, the home care agencies, I know there's a lot of providers here have made I hear them. We've tried to push forward, and that's why we spend a lot of time making sure that that hourly wage stays at least $3 ahead. I know that's not sufficient. And as time goes on, someone's going to say, well, if you keep it at just $3, that's only going to be a decrease over time with inflation. I get that. It's a constant process. We made a demonstrated effort last year. I think this next step is going to move the ball in the right direction. But once again, where have all the people gone? They've disappeared. They've disappeared. There's just not a lot of people. And that's why we need to be very open-minded, as there are people coming here for the opportunity to create a new life. And we better recruit them, be aggressive, be open-minded, because quite frankly, they are the hardest workers you're ever going to see.
And by the way, if anyone has a question, they could raise their hands and I'll come by with a microphone, a follow-up question, anything that they would like to ask the lawmakers up there. Just raise your hands and I'll come back around with a microphone to ask you. All right, gentlemen, I'm going to shift just a little bit, okay? So given this dramatic increase in the older population that we've talked about, okay, do you think that simply increasing government spending is the best option to provide additional long-term care services? Or do we need to explore private solutions? And I think that's a big one.
Yeah. Part of my solution that I'm working with a professor in Cornell, the Long-Term Care Authority, speaks to a public-private partnership. A public benefit corporation by design brings in the private markets to publicly finance public goods. And we need all the help we can get in terms of how do we actually finance the long-term care, that we don't have to come to the table begging for crumbs every single budget cycle. We can get this, we can do this if we treat infrastructure, if we treat the care sector like it's true infrastructure, just like any other bridge or tunnels that we're building. And we can do it by leveraging the future incomes that may come to the home care sector, the nursing homes, and figuring out how to get counties and institutions like SUNY to get back into the business of care. This is a comprehensive plan that we can put forward to engage the private sector to help us in terms of financing long-term care.
I agree. It needs to be a public-private partnership in order to do that. And I think that works. I think that works best. But we can't. I think one of the big problems we saw over the course of the pandemic with the staffing shortages was private duty coming in and really taking advantage of the situation. And we need to make sure that there's safeguards in place that would prevent that from happening in other avenues. When I had my practice, I had contracts with different businesses around the area, Living Resources being one of them. And it was evident even at that time that there was a severe staffing shortage and that wages were not in parity with other levels of care. And what have we been doing other than fighting for increases each year? We come back to it. And I'm gonna bring it back again to rebasing the Medicaid calculation for this. This has not happened in over 15 years. And it's something that I think, again, will lift the floor for workers across the board and across industries. And it's a massive undertaking because we're not just talking about it in one sector, but across the board with Medicaid. And New York is one of the few states where you have a county contribution involved in that, along with the federal and state. And it's going to take some people, getting dragged there, I think, kicking and screaming. But long term, what I think that will reward or be the reward is a more fiscally responsible policy and increased wages.
Private sector has to be a part of it. I agree with what both Jake and Ron have said, but same token, we had to make sure that there's full transparency and accountability. I know as one who most of the members, when they have healthcare issues, they call me to help their constituents. And I see a very difference between the nonprofit health plans and the for-profit health plans in regards to response and willingness to go a little bit deeper. So if we're going to do that, which I think is possible and it's potential, we got to make sure, I personally think we should start off with some of the nonprofit entities that usually are more mission focused versus bottom line focused. Make sure it's sustainable, but also welcome the private sector where appropriate. You know, obviously technology is critical. I know telemedicine's on the conversation today. And those type of tools, we need to be open to that. But it's public dollars. Government is all in. Better make sure that we're spending our taxpayers' dollars wisely.
No, I'm a very left progressive person, and I would say if everything is universal, everything is public, everything is free, you'll resolve everything. All the problems that we have right now is because of the inefficiencies of having non-universal programs in healthcare and long-term care. But I'm also very pragmatic in where we are as a nation, where we are as a state, and where once we marketize anything, it's really hard to go back. So in the interim, we got to figure out a solution on how to finance long-term care. And that's why we're working on a long-term care authority plan.
I will add, there's a question coming from here, but I have a question before that. Real quick, guys. So it's been found that most Americans want to age in place at home. Speaking of the home health aides and home health care workers, what are you guys trying to do or to try to support that, make this happen for Americans? Are you doing anything?
You know, it's interesting. I don't know if you guys heard, but the budget was a little bit late this year. All right. And one of the reasons why, and one of the solutions to answer your question, Dan, is we need to build more housing opportunities for everybody. You know, we were talking earlier, first of all, our state population is at the highest it's ever been. Problem is our state of New York is not growing as higher as some of the other bigger states. So this is what's led to this phenomenon that everyone's leaving New York. Well, they're not all leaving. We have a higher population. However, people are leaving. People are leaving. They are going to Florida and Texas. I don't blame them. When I'm 65, I'm probably going to take 6 months off and go. That being said, maybe 70. I don't want my competitors to get excited. I'm leaving soon. But the reality is a lot of people go to New Jersey because housing costs are less expensive in New Jersey. We need to build more supply. We need to also provide housing vouchers for individuals who are in that situation. Ron talked earlier about allowing individuals who are not impoverished to help them buy into programs so they don't become impoverished. We do have a great potential with housing vouchers to help keep people in their communities. And as a former mayor, you know, I want my senior citizens in the community because they are the stability of the community in many aspects. So let's expand the housing. And the governor had a good idea. The approach needs a little bit fine tuning. I think we're all committed to addressing that because as the infamous Jimmy McMillan said back when he ran against Governor Cuomo years ago, the rent is too damn high.
Anybody else want to take that up or we're good? We're good?
I think we're I didn't see where he went, Dan.
I'm right here. I have a question right here coming up, so go ahead.
I know John and I know Ron down in Queens is not local to this area, but a lot of the work that we see Hudson Valley doing in terms of workforce development in this area, you know, we have a great partnership in them, and they're looking to expand in this area, and the funding that they're getting and the workforce that they're seeing in growing those programs, I think is very encouraging. And that's something that John and I are actively working on. And the Capital Region delegation, I'm not going to shortchange any of them. They're all pushing for this, and we're seeing that program expand.
Okay, we have a question right here coming from Darlene.
Hi, my question is Medicaid transportation. When we have to call for Medicaid transportation with medical answering services, we have to call a company out in Syracuse, which they do not know nothing about the capital region areas and each district beyond the capital region, and they don't know specifics. And they have taxi companies that with the Uber, Lyft, etc. taking over, there's lack of taxi companies, some that are not ADA compliant and make you wait in the ER for over 8 to 11 hours, which forced me to leave Ellis Hospital in Schenectady and walk to Clifton Park. So I wasn't willing to wait over 11 hours for a taxi.
What's the
So
question?
how are you gonna work on getting better taxi service, and would you send it to local DSS versus having company outside, private company?
So Darlene, stand up for a second. Darlene is actually a quasi constituent. She seems to be in my office every other day. She is one of your best advocates you're ever going to find. She is really remarkable. And by the way, if you think she's tough with that question, you should see what she does to Dan Bazile at CDTA. But you're absolutely right. I don't want to get into politics of the MAS, but the reality is the intention behind the answering service is to have accountability and a documented process. At the end of the day, and this comes from a guy who used to always deal with people complaining about, why don't we have more firehouses in the city? In case, and I said, well, let me ask you something. Has a firehouse ever put out a fire? No. You want the firefighters to respond. We want a coordinated system to meet the rising demand. I think that's part of our challenge. Demand continues to rise. Also, and I know I sponsor legislation in one certain area of this, is that we need to, at some point, you're right, the taxis in upstate New York, it's a whole different ballgame in the city, are few and far between now. Uber and Lyft have definitely had an impact. But on the other hand, is there a way we can include them more as part of that response system? And that's what I'm trying to do to make it a reimbursable coverage for those individuals. Because if they meet all the safety clearances and have the proper insurances, they're part of the solution. And CDTA continues with Darlene's support and efforts to expand their service as well.
I have a question coming from there, but I have a question before that, guys. Okay, I'll be with you in just a moment. Okay, so Medicare, as we all know it, does not currently cover long-term care. Is there a movement to find a middle ground between Medicare and Medicaid that would not require impoverishment to quality long-term care benefits?
Yeah, I mean, Medicaid is not an entitlement. Medicaid home care is not an entitlement program, and it's based on a waiver program. So until we fix that gap, we'll continue to rely on the markets and third parties to help us pay for long-term care, which is the rationale why we deployed managed care organizations, MLTCs, to come into the space in the first place. I think if Medicare steps in and makes it clear that moving forward, we're addressing the aging crisis by paying for long-term care, it will resolve everything. But going back to what we're proposing, which is to fill that gap with the long-term care authority to help figure out how to pay for the needs of this population, I think we can, at least in the interim, get to a positive outcome.
Does it make sense to you guys that Medicare that takes care of healthcare for seniors doesn't take care of long-term care? I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. Does it make sense to you?
So as Ron mentioned earlier, he's a progressive liberal.
Yeah.
Jake's a Republican, and I'm right in the middle, both politically and physically today. I have not been a big fan of single payer. I'm not opposed to it. I just have a hard time seeing it happen politically in this country. Not the state of New York. State of New York, I think, be supportive. But when you look at the states throughout the country, there's a lot of red. And that's just not going to happen in this environment. So we have to work on different concepts that Ron's been laying out until that day comes. And then we also have to be mindful of the fact that when we make that decision, and I don't disagree with the concept, if the federal government's going to be a partner, then there's a potential for it to work. But the federal government's got to be a partner. We can't do it on our own. And then as a reminder, everybody, every single provider is requiring the government for their pay. Just keep that in mind. That's something to keep in mind.
All right, we have a question right here from.
David McNally from AARP. It won't, good morning. It won't surprise any of you. I'm going to ask a question about the long-term care ombudsman program. So we were told we needed $12.5 to $15 million in the budget. So the state could hire 235 people. So nursing homes would get a weekly visit from the ombudsman. Ron Kim sponsored $12.5 million in the Assembly One House. Thank you very much. We ended up with $2.5 million. I keep hearing this cloudy answer that, well, the state couldn't hire 235 people in a year. They couldn't take all that money and use it. I'm a little incredulous to that, given we're the Empire State. And yeah, it seems like 235 people is something the state could do if they really saw this as an emergency. So I want to confirm with you that that is in fact what we're hearing. And my second question, if I could, if this is really a crisis like we think it is, why not call in the National Guard, train them and deploy them to the facilities until the state can ramp up these full-time people? They did an excellent job during COVID. That all my COVID shots and my tests were done by National Guard in the early days. So if this is really a crisis that the state sees that we see, then we can't wait 2, 3, 5, 6 years for this to be ramped up to what it has to be. Thank you, Dan. Thanks.
I agree with you, David, and I think not only the ombudsman program, but we have a administrative crisis across the board. We have amazing public servants that have dedicated themselves, like Greg, to public service, but there is a huge gap. You know, I think 30,000 workers have been let go over the last many years, and they haven't been rehired. We don't have the capacity right now in this moment to deliver care as a government. And so we're constantly outsourcing, contracting out, relying on third parties, creating tertiary markets to fix problems, punting blame elsewhere, including, this is unrelated, including the current migrant crisis. The governor signed an emergency order. But if you look carefully, what she's doing is just expediting more contracts to third parties. That's the emergency. That's what she's allowing herself to do, just like during COVID. We do not have the government public administrative capacity to step in and take care of older adults, immigrants, or anyone in the state until we get serious about rebuilding the capacity to take care of people. We'll constantly be making excuses and punting things out.
I agree with Ron. Completely with that. And again, I think in terms of the ombudsman being left out, you saw a priority shift in terms of the budget. We had, you know, our previous governor used to say, you know, the budgets are about priorities. And, you know, I would commonly use that line when we're talking about the aging population and our veterans, and they seem to get lost. They seem to get lost in the shuffle of during the budget. There's items that are included in the A prints and the B prints. And then when you get down to the D print, it's gone for whatever reason. And to answer your question regarding the National Guard, I started out as a healthcare officer in the reserves. And I think the staffing shortage, and we actually saw this during COVID when they were deployed, is that many of them, being trained professionals, they left their places of employment and caused shortages there going to other places. And I think that speaks to the larger question of the staffing emergency that we have. So it's a real issue. I don't necessarily disagree that they should be used for emergencies like this, but you have to think about the second and third order effects of doing that and where they're coming from and where they're leaving.
I don't disagree with anything they said, David. From my perspective, I would have rather had the 12.5 million in there. And if they didn't hire the people, we call it a dry appropriation and we just move that money along to next year. And the National Guard, absolutely. I also want to throw something else out there in this whole context, something to keep in mind, because unless something happens dramatically in the next 2 or 3 weeks in the legislature, May 22nd is going to be a watershed moment in this state, because we have we talk about the workforce shortage all day long. We have a lot of out-of-state nurses working in this state. And unless something magically happens, they're done May 22nd. And we're hearing dozens, if not hundreds, of nurses are no longer going to be able to practice in the state. Even the education department, once again, I mentioned them earlier, they're trying to facilitate their licensure now. And they're saying we need more time, and they're working as hard as they can. This is going to be another crisis that's going to hit us, and we need to be very mindful of it. It's going to be a major problem for a lot of our hospitals and nursing homes. And as you know, that impacts the whole broken healthcare ecosystem.
Guys. Just hang on just one moment. I think Lou has a question or a statement.
It's a question, and if I could get, there we go. So in New York, there are 2.5 million unpaid family caregivers. And nationally, they say that 1 in 5 adults is taking care of an aging or disabled loved one. One of the programs that we rely on that has been part of this program for years is the Consumer Directed Personal Assistance Program. And 3 years ago, they tried to cut that program. And it's become a lifeline in many communities. We have on our panel today one of the local representatives. Is there any, and AARP is an advocate for those caregivers as well, and they had a bill last year for tax credits for caregivers. Is there anything being discussed in the legislature that would recognize those family caregivers and give them a break as to their role and what they are doing for those aging loved ones? Because without them, the whole system collapses.
Thank you for that. I sponsored that bill last year. We didn't get into the budget, but we'll continue to fight with ARP to try to get that in before session is over. But I think the larger point that you're trying to make is that we do live in an extremely ageist society, and this the fact that we can't wrap our head around why getting this right in terms of the caregivers that have sacrificed their careers, their jobs to take care of loved ones is critically important to our economy, is testament to the fact that we live in an ageist society, that we don't care about older adults as much as other sectors. Childcare is very important. I have three young, beautiful daughters. The other one's not here. Yeah. But we're able to change that narrative over the last few years, turning economic returns and tying our economic growth and productivity by taking care of our childcare properly. But what about elder care? What about the older population? We haven't done that yet. And I look forward to changing the narrative with ARP, because once we get that right, and once we do a bill that I was talking about, changing the state constitution for older adults to have a right to age with dignity in New York, we can put the money behind that moving forward.
Okay, we have time for, I think, one more question. We had a question over here.
My question for all the lovely legislators is, have you considered having healthcare workers or people, non-paid healthcare workers, not have to pay any New York state tax? Would that be a way to get healthcare workers? And we have a lot of immigration, a lot of people trying to come into this country. They'll do jobs, and some way to get them trained quickly into our workforce, into the healthcare system.
It's a good question. Well, listen, if you want to take it a little bit further, we actually still have a program that the former governor called Tax-Free New York to drive technology companies here, which there is. So it's a matter of priorities. There is exemption on taxes. That's an interesting item. I think the bigger challenge is going to be when we talk to our finance people is, well, what's that cost us? What's the cost? And then once we quantify that, we can have that discussion. It's probably going to cost us a couple $1 billion, and we're looking at future declining personal income tax. So it's going to be challenging.
Yeah, I would. Sorry.
To my knowledge, we haven't had so much of not paying taxes. I've heard of tax rebates. I've heard of ideas like that. Certainly loan forgiveness. I think there's a lot of bills out there that we support that would go about it from that way, but not in terms of not paying taxes. No, I haven't heard much of that.
Yeah, I know where you're going with this, and I appreciate thinking outside the box and try to figure out how to recruit more workers. Thank you for your questions, Hazel. But I would just say, we have a great model, and Greg Olson is there doing the non-Medicaid home care space, where they started to integrate the home care workers into the county governments little by little. And that has shown to be very effective, because now you have access to county transportation, county government, resources, and home care workers could be essentially treated like public workers and public employees. Some other states already do this. In California, most Medicaid home care workers are viewed as public employees, and actually some of them are part of the public municipal unions even. So for me, I think that is a better approach in the long run. If we start to treat home care workers like real public servants and get them the benefits, the retirement plan, as like we all do, the pension plans that we're all getting, those are the type of steps that we need to really reform and get the home care sector right moving forward.
All right, that concludes my portion of this program. Thank you, Assemblyman Ron Kim. Thank you, Assemblyman John McDonald. Thank you, Senator Jake Ashby. Appreciate your time. Thank you so much for listening to me, guys. I'm going to hand this over back to Lou. Have a good morning.
Thank you, Dan.